Marcus Chun had always been unremarkable. At 17, he stood barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, with unruly black hair that refused to cooperate with any amount of gel, and thick glasses that constantly slipped down his nose. His classmates at Roosevelt High School barely noticed him, and that was exactly how he preferred it. While other teenagers worried about dating, sports, and college applications, Marcus spent his time buried in ancient mythology books and obscure historical texts. The day everything changed started like any other. Marcus trudged through the rain-soaked streets of Seattle, his backpack heavy with textbooks, heading to his part-time job at Professor Aldrich's antiquities shop. The old bookstore smelled of dust and aged paper filled with artifacts and manuscripts that most people would dismiss as worthless junk. But Marcus found comfort among the ancient relics, especially the collection of dragon-themed artifacts that Professor Aldrich had acquired over decades of archaeological expeditions. Professor Aldrich, a weathered man in his 70s with wild white hair, had taken Marcus under his wing after discovering the boy's unusual ability to read and interpret ancient languages that had stumped scholars for centuries. Marcus never questioned this gift, assuming it was just a knack for pattern recognition and linguistic analysis. "Marcus, my boy," Professor Aldrich called out as the bell above the door chimed. "Perfect timing. I've just received something extraordinary from my colleague in Tibet." Marcus set down his backpack and approached the counter where a wooden crate sat, partially opened. Inside, nestled in protective foam, lay a crystalline pendant roughly the size of his palm. The crystal was unlike anything he had ever seen, seemingly containing swirling galaxies of deep blue and silver light that moved with hypnotic beauty. Ancient symbols were etched around its perimeter, symbols that Marcus recognized despite never having studied them before. "What does it say?" Professor Aldrich asked, watching Marcus's face carefully. Marcus lifted the pendant, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through his fingers. The symbols seemed to glow brighter as he touched them, and words formed in his mind as naturally as breathing. It says, "To the one who bridges the old ways and the new, the guardians await your awakening." Professor Aldrich's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" Those symbols predate any known writing system by thousands of years. Before Marcus could respond, the pendant began to pulse with increasing intensity. The light spread up his arms, and suddenly, the small shop felt impossibly cramped. The walls seemed to stretch and warp, and Marcus found himself struggling to breathe as waves of energy coursed through his body. "Professor, what's happening?" Marcus gasped, but when he looked around, Professor Aldrich was gone. The shop was gone. Instead, he stood in a vast crystalline cavern that stretched beyond the reach of sight. Towering pillars of what appeared to be the same material as the pendant rose from the floor, each one humming with power. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as he realized he was no longer alone. Shadows moved in the depths of the cavern, massive shapes that defied easy description. Then, one of the shadows stepped into the light cast by the pendant, and Marcus's world tilted on its axis. The creature before him was a dragon, but not like any dragon from the movies or books he had read. This being stood nearly 30 feet tall, with scales that shifted color like oil on water. Its eyes were ancient beyond measure, holding depths of knowledge that made Marcus feel like an infant. Wings that could blot out the sun were folded against its serpentine body, and when it moved, the very air seemed to sing. At last, the dragon spoke, its voice resonating through the cavern like distant thunder. "The bridge walker awakens. We have waited eons for your arrival, young guardian." Marcus stumbled backward, his voice cracking. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm just a high school student. I work part-time in a bookstore. I'm nobody special." The dragon's massive head tilted, and something that might have been amusement flickered in its ancient eyes. "Nobody special? Child, you carry the blood of the first humans who walked among us in the time before the Great Separation. You are Marcus Chun, descendant of the line that once stood as equal partners to dragonkind." More shapes emerged from the shadows, each one a dragon of impossible size and majesty. Some were sleek and serpentine, others broad and powerful, but all carried themselves with the dignity of beings who had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. As they approached, Marcus noticed something that made his knees nearly buckle. They were lowering their heads in what could only be described as a bow. "This is impossible," Marcus whispered, his logical mind rebelling against what his eyes were showing him. "Dragons don't exist. This has to be some kind of hallucination." The first dragon, who seemed to be their leader, raised its great head and spoke with gentle patience. "We have existed since before your species learned to make fire, young one. We have watched over your world from the spaces between, maintaining the balance that keeps your reality stable. But now that balance is threatened, and only a bridge walker can restore what has been broken." Marcus's mind reeled as he tried to process the implications. "What do you mean, spaces between? And what's a bridge walker?" "Your kind knew us once," another dragon said, its voice like wine through ancient forests. "In the early days of human civilization, we worked together. Humans provided innovation and adaptability while we offered wisdom and power. But as your numbers grew and your technology advanced, the connection was severed to prevent complications." The leader continued, "Bridgewalkers are humans born with the genetic memory and spiritual capacity to reconnect our species. They are exceedingly rare, perhaps 1 in a billion. We had begun to fear that the bloodline had been lost forever." Marcus looked down at the pendant in his hands, which continued to pulse with warm light. "So what am I supposed to do? I don't know anything about being a bridge walker or maintaining cosmic balance. I can barely maintain my GPA." A sound that might have been laughter echoed through the cavern. "Humility is the mark of wisdom, young guardian. But do not underestimate yourself. The fact that you can stand in our presence without madness, that you can read the old scripts, that the Heartstone responds to your touch, these are not small things." The Heartstone. Marcus realized the dragon was referring to the pendant. As if responding to his recognition, it pulsed brighter, and suddenly Marcus could sense things that had been invisible before. Energy flowed through the cavern like living rivers, connecting not just the dragons, but extending outward in patterns that suggested vast networks spanning everything. "The barriers between dimensions have begun to weaken," the leader explained. "Entities from realms where the laws of physics operate differently are beginning to seep through. If this continues unchecked, your world and countless others will be consumed by chaos." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. "And you think I can stop this somehow?" "Not alone," the dragon assured him. "But with our guidance and your unique abilities, yes. The question is whether you will accept this destiny, knowing that your life as an ordinary human is ended forever." Marcus stared at the assembled dragons, each one a being of such power and ancient wisdom that their very presence should have driven him insane with terror. Instead, he felt something unexpected, a sense of rightness, as if pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed were finally clicking into place. The pendant grew warm against his chest, and in its light, Marcus could see threads of possibility stretching out into infinity. Some led to darkness and destruction, others to wonders beyond imagination. All of them hinged on the choice he made in this moment. He thought of his quiet life, his part-time job, his invisibility at school. Then he thought of the responsibility these ancient beings were offering him, the chance to be part of something larger than himself, larger than anything he had ever imagined. "If I say yes," Marcus asked quietly, "what happens to my normal life? My family, my friends, Professor Aldrich?" "Time moves differently here than in your realm," the leader replied gently. "We can return you to moments after you left, and you will be able to maintain your human connections. But you will also carry the knowledge and responsibility of what you truly are. The choice, young bridge walker, is yours alone to make." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the pendant's warmth spread through his entire being. When he opened them again, His voice was steady despite his trembling hands. "Tell me what I need to do." The dragon's collective response resonated through the crystalline cavern like a song of welcome that had been waiting eons to be sung. And in that moment, Marcus Chun, unremarkable high school student, ceased to exist. In his place stood something new, something that bridged two worlds and carried the hopes of both species on his young shoulders. The real adventure was just beginning. The training began immediately, though training seemed an inadequate word for what Marcus experienced. The dragon leader, who introduced himself as Zephyros the Ancient, explained that traditional learning would take decades they didn't have. Instead, they would use something called the memory cascade, a process that would download essential knowledge directly into Marcus's consciousness. "This will be intense," Zephyros warned as the other dragons formed a circle around Marcus. Human minds are not naturally equipped to receive dragon memories, but the Heartstone will help bridge the gap and prevent your sanity from fracturing. Marcus gripped the pendant tighter, feeling its warm pulse against his palm. "Define intense." A dragon with scales like polished emeralds stepped forward. "I am Verdania, keeper of the natural laws. You will receive my understanding of how dimensional barriers function, how energy flows between realities, and how to detect anomalies that threaten the cosmic balance." Another dragon, this one with scales that seemed to contain swirling galaxies, moved closer. "I am Cosmian, watcher of the void spaces. Through me, you will learn to navigate the spaces between dimensions and understand the entities that seek to breach our reality." One by one, each of the 12 dragons introduced themselves and their specialties. There was Pyraxis, master of elemental forces, Cronia, guardian of time streams, and Mentera, weaver of consciousness. Each offered to share knowledge that scholars would kill to possess, knowledge that would fundamentally change Marcus's understanding of existence itself. "Are you ready, young Bridgewalker?" Zephyros asked. Marcus nodded, though his throat felt dry. "As ready as I'll ever be." The dragons began to hum, a sound that vibrated through the crystalline cavern and seemed to resonate in Marcus's very bones. The Heartstone blazed to life, casting patterns of light that danced across the cavern walls. Then, the knowledge began to flow. It started as a trickle, images and concepts filtering into his mind like half-remembered dreams. Marcus saw the Earth as it once was, when dragons soared openly through ancient skies and worked alongside early human civilizations. He witnessed the construction of monuments that history had forgotten, saw cities of impossible beauty that had been erased from all records. But then the trickle became a flood. Suddenly, Marcus was experiencing memories that spanned millennia. He felt the grief of the Great Separation, when dragons retreated to pocket dimensions to avoid interfering with human development. He understood the delicate network of energy that held reality together, saw how each dimension was connected to every other like an infinite web of possibility. The knowledge came faster now, threatening to overwhelm his human consciousness. He learned about the void entities, beings from collapsed realities that sought to consume stable dimensions. He saw how they operated, sliding through cracks in space-time like cosmic parasites, devouring everything in their path. Through Cronia's memories, Marcus experienced time as dragons perceived it, not as a linear progression, but as a flowing river that could be observed from above. He watched civilizations rise and fall and fast-forward, saw the patterns that connected seemingly random events across centuries. From Mentera, he gained understanding of consciousness itself, learning how awareness could exist independently of physical form and how thoughts could shape reality when properly focused. The knowledge was so vast and alien that Marcus felt his sense of self beginning to fragment. Just when he thought his mind would shatter from the overload, the Heartstone pulsed with protective energy, wrapping his consciousness in a cocoon of stability. The pendant didn't just shield him from the worst effects of the memory cascade. It began to organize the new knowledge, creating mental frameworks that allowed him to understand and access what he had learned. When the humming finally stopped, Marcus collapsed to his knees, gasping. His head felt like it had been stuffed with the contents of 1,000 libraries, but somehow he could think clearly. The knowledge was there, organized and accessible, waiting for him to draw upon it. Impressive, Zephyros rumbled approvingly. Most humans lose consciousness within the first few minutes. Your mind adapted faster than we hoped. Marcus struggled to his feet, surprised to find that his body felt different too. He was still the same scrawny teenager, but there's a new awareness of the energy flowing through him, a connection to forces he was only beginning to understand. Now comes the practical test, announced Pyraxis, the dragon of elemental forces. Knowledge without application is merely trivia. You must learn to use what you have gained. The cavern around them began to shift and change. The crystalline walls flowed like liquid, reforming into a new space that looked like a vast training ground. Floating platforms of various sizes appeared throughout the area, connected by bridges of pure energy. Your first lesson, Verdania explained, is learning to perceive dimensional anomalies. Even now, a small breach has been opened in one of the practice chambers. You must find it and seal it before the simulation entities it releases overwhelm your position. Marcus felt a moment of panic. Simulation entities? What happens if they catch me? Nothing permanent, Cosmian assured him with what might have been amusement. You will simply experience the sensation of having your consciousness devoured by cosmic horrors. Most humans find it quite unpleasant. Before Marcus could protest that he wasn't ready, the dragons had withdrawn to observation platforms high above a training ground. He was alone in the vast space, with only the Heartstone's light to guide him. Drawing on his newly acquired knowledge, Marcus extended his senses beyond normal human perception. The training ground looked empty to his eyes, but when he shifted his awareness to what Verdania had called dimensional sight, the space revealed its true nature. Energy flowed through the area in complex patterns, most of them stable and natural. But there, near a floating platform about 100 yards away, Marcus detected a distortion. The energy pattern was wrong, creating a ripple effect that spread outward like a stone dropped in still water. As he focused on the anomaly, Marcus could see through it into another space entirely. The view beyond was nightmare fuel, a realm where geometry followed no earthly rules and shadows moved with predatory intelligence. Even worse, something on the other side had noticed the breach and was pushing through. The creature that emerged defied easy description. It was roughly humanoid, but seemed to exist in more dimensions than Marcus could properly perceive. Where it should have had a face, there was instead a swirling vortex that hurt to look at directly. Its limbs moved in ways that violated physics, and its very presence caused the stable energy patterns around it to begin breaking down. Marcus felt terror try to overwhelm him, but the dragon knowledge in his mind provided context that helped him focus. This was just a simulation, a training construct designed to test his abilities without real danger. The entity was no more real than a video game enemy, though it certainly felt genuine enough. Following instincts he didn't fully understand, Marcus raised his hand and focused his will through the Heartstone. The pendant blazed with brilliant light, and suddenly Marcus could see the dimensional breach as clearly as if it were outlined in neon. More importantly, he could see how to fix it. The process was like performing surgery on reality itself. Using techniques that came from Verdania's memories, Marcus began to weave the torn edges of space-time back together. It required incredible concentration and precision, like trying to sew with threads of pure energy while the fabric itself fought against his efforts. The simulation entity sensed what he was doing and turned its attention toward him. It moved across the training ground with impossible speed, its presence causing the very air to writhe with unnatural energies. Marcus knew he only had seconds before it reached him. Drawing on Pyraxis' knowledge of elemental forces, Marcus gathered energy from the surrounding space and shaped it into a barrier of pure force. The entity struck the barrier like a meteor hitting a mountain, and For a terrifying moment, Marcus thought his hastily constructed defenses would shatter. But the Heartstone fed him additional power, and somehow the barrier held. With the entity temporarily contained, Marcus returned his attention to the dimensional breach. Working faster than he had ever thought possible, he completed the repair just as his barrier finally gave way. The simulation entity, cut off from its home dimension, simply dissolved into wisps of fading energy. The training ground returned to its normal state, and Marcus found himself standing alone in the sudden silence, breathing hard and covered in sweat. "Excellent," Zephyros's voice boomed from above. "Crude technique, but effective. You show remarkable instinct for spatial manipulation." The dragons descended from their observation points, their massive forms moving with fluid grace. Marcus realized that despite the terror he had felt during the exercise, there was also something else, something he had never experienced before. He felt capable. For the first time in his life, Marcus had faced a challenge that truly mattered and succeeded through his own efforts. The power flowing through him wasn't just the dragon's knowledge. It was his own potential finally awakened. "That was just the beginning," Mentera explained, her telepathic voice gentle in his mind. "Each exercise will be more complex, more dangerous. You must master not just the techniques, but learn to trust your instincts when facing the unknown." Marcus nodded, surprised to find himself looking forward to the next challenge rather than dreading it. "What's the next test?" The dragons exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes. Then Zephyros smiled, an expression that was both terrifying and oddly reassuring on his draconic features. "Next, young bridge walker, you learn to fly." The training ground began to shift again, and Marcus felt his human life slip another step further into the past. There was no going back now, only forward into whatever he was becoming. And despite the fear, despite the overwhelming responsibility, he found himself eager to see what other impossible things he might accomplish. The boy who had entered Professor Aldrich's shop was fading away, replaced by something new and extraordinary. Marcus Chun was becoming a bridge walker, and the universe would never be the same. Flying, Marcus quickly discovered, was nothing like he had imagined. It wasn't the Superman style soaring through clouds that movies portrayed, nor was it simply a matter of thinking happy thoughts and lifting off. Dragon flight was about understanding the fundamental forces that govern reality and convincing them to work differently around you. "Human flight is impossible according to your physics," Zephyros explained as they stood on a platform suspended thousands of feet above the cavern floor. "Therefore, we must teach you to briefly exist according to different physics entirely." Marcus peered over the edge, his newly enhanced vision allowing him to see the distant floor far below. The rational part of his mind insisted this was suicide, but the dragon knowledge whispered that death was just another rule that could be bent under the right circumstances. "The Heartstone will anchor your consciousness," Cosmian added, floating nearby with wings that seemed to be made of solidified starlight. "Without it, shifting between dimensional physics would scatter your awareness across multiple realities. With it, you remain coherent while adopting new physical laws." The process of learning to fly turned out to be less about defeating gravity and more about temporarily stepping outside the dimensional framework where gravity had authority. Marcus had to project his consciousness slightly outside normal space-time, while keeping his physical form connected through the Heartstone's energy. His first attempt resulted in him falling about 10 feet before panic brought him crashing back into normal physics. The second attempt was worse, somehow managing to briefly exist in 3 different dimensions simultaneously, which gave him a splitting headache and made his vision blur for several minutes. But Marcus was nothing if not stubborn. Growing up as the invisible kid had taught him persistence, and the dragon memories provided context for what he was trying to achieve. By the 5th attempt, he managed to hover for nearly 30 seconds before exhaustion forced him to land. Progress, Verdania observed with approval. Most humans require weeks to achieve even momentary flight. Your adaptation continues to exceed our projections. The flight training continued for what felt like hours, but could have been days or minutes in the timeless cavern. Marcus learned to navigate three-dimensional space with increasing confidence, discovering that dragon flight was as much about mental flexibility as physical technique. He had to constantly shift his perception of which rules applied to him at any given moment. As his skills improved, the dragons began to teach him more complex maneuvers. He learned to phase partially out of normal space to avoid obstacles, to ride dimensional currents that were invisible to normal human senses, and to use the Heartstone's energy to extend his endurance beyond human limits. But the real test came when Cronia announced that his training in basic techniques was complete. "Now you must learn to apply these skills under pressure," she said, her scales shimmering with temporal energy. "A real dimensional breach has been detected in your realm, and you must seal it before the entities beyond notice its existence." The cavern around them began to fade, and Marcus felt the familiar sensation of being pulled across impossible distances. When his vision cleared, he found himself standing on the roof of a downtown Seattle skyscraper, the city lights stretching out below him in all directions. The dragons were invisible to normal human perception, but Marcus could sense them nearby, watching and ready to intervene if necessary. The Heartstone hung heavy against his chest, pulsing with energy that seemed more urgent than before. "There," Zephyros' voice whispered in his mind, directing his attention to a construction site about 6 blocks away. "Do you see it?" Marcus extended his dimensional sight and immediately spotted the problem. Above the half-built frame of what would become another office building, reality was wrong. The air itself seemed to be tearing, creating a window into somewhere that definitely wasn't Earth. Through the breach, Marcus could see a landscape of twisted metal and impossible angles. Structures that might have been buildings stretched in directions that hurt to contemplate, and moving among them were shapes that suggested intelligence, but followed no earthly template for consciousness. "The breach is small now," Mintara's telepathic voice explained, "but it will grow exponentially if left unrepaired. Within hours, it could expand large enough for major entities to cross over. Your world has no defenses against such incursions." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on him again, but this time it was accompanied by something new: confidence. The training had worked. He knew what needed to be done, and more importantly, he believed he could do it. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped off the edge of the skyscraper. The flight across downtown Seattle was exhilarating in a way that no simulation could match. Real wind rushed past him as he soared between buildings, the city lights blurring into streams of color. The few people on the streets below remained oblivious to the figure moving through the sky above them, their senses unable to perceive someone operating partially outside normal dimensional space. As he approached the construction site, Marcus could feel the wrongness radiating from the breach like heat from a fire. The dimensional tear was maybe 3 feet across, but through his enhanced perception, he could see the damage it was already causing to local space-time. Reality was becoming unstable in a roughly 100-yard radius around the anomaly. Landing on a girder about 20 feet from the breach, Marcus began the delicate process of dimensional repair. But this time, something was different. This wasn't a training simulation designed to test his skills. This was a real wound in the fabric of reality, and it was fighting his attempts to heal it. The energy patterns were chaotic, constantly shifting in ways that made it nearly impossible to get a stable grip on the damaged edges. Worse, something on the other side had definitely noticed the breach and was actively working to expand it. Through the tear, Marcus could see one of the alien entities approaching. It was roughly spherical, but covered in what looked like sensory organs that operated according to physics he didn't recognize. As it drew near the dimensional boundary, the breach began to widen, reality stretching like taffy under stress. "Having trouble, young bridge walker?" The voice came from behind him, but when Marcus spun around, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice in his veins. Standing on another girder was a human figure, but everything about it was wrong. It looked like someone had tried to create a person using only secondhand descriptions and a fundamental misunderstanding of how biology worked. The proportions were almost right, but the movements were too fluid and the eyes held an intelligence that was distinctly not human. "What are you?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. "I am what you might call an advanced scout," the entity replied, its voice perfectly human despite coming from a throat that clearly wasn't designed for human speech. "My people have been watching your little reality for some time. Such a stable dimensional framework, so ripe with untapped energy. We had hoped to begin the harvest process quietly, but it seems someone has taken notice of our preparations." The entity gestured toward the breach, which was now almost 6 feet across and growing rapidly. "You could simply walk away, young human. Return to your simple life and pretend this never happened. My people have no interest in your species directly. We only require your dimensional substrate. Most of you would never even notice the transition." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications. These entities weren't just randomly trying to invade Earth. They were farming dimensional energy from stable realities, consuming entire universes to fuel their own existence. "How many?" he asked quietly. "How many worlds have you already harvested?" The entity's not quite right smile widened. "Does it matter? They serve their purpose and provided sustenance for a greater form of existence. Your reality will do the same, whether you resist or not. The only question is whether you die trying to prevent the inevitable." The breach was now nearly 10 feet across, and more entities were visible on the other side, waiting to cross over. Marcus realized he was facing not just a dimensional anomaly, but the advance guard of an invasion that threatened not just Earth, but every stable reality in the cosmic web. Drawing on reserves of courage he didn't know he possessed, Marcus raised the Heartstone and began to gather energy for the most complex dimensional manipulation he had ever attempted. He wasn't just going to repair this breach. He was going to seal it so thoroughly that these entities would never be able to open another one in this location. "Foolish child," the entity said, its form beginning to shift and reveal its true nature. "You face forces that have devoured galaxies. What can one human do against such power?" Marcus smiled, feeling the power of 12 ancient dragons flowing through him and the confidence that came from finally understanding his true purpose. "I'm not just one human," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through multiple dimensions simultaneously. "I'm a bridge walker, and you have no idea what that means." The real battle was about to begin, and Marcus Chun was ready to show these cosmic parasites exactly why humanity had earned the respect of dragons. The boy from Seattle was gone, replaced by something that could stand against forces that destroyed civilizations. The entities were about to learn that Earth was under new management. The entity's true form was a nightmare of shifting geometries and predatory intelligence. What had appeared human moments before now revealed itself as something that existed across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. Parts of it phased in and out of visibility as it moved between layers of reality, making it nearly impossible to focus on directly. "You think your dragon friends make you special?" It hissed, its voice now coming from several directions at once. "We have consumed realities where dragons were gods. We have devoured dimensions where humans achieved immortality. Power means nothing when faced with entropy itself." Marcus felt a moment of doubt as more entities began pushing through the expanded breach. These beings had existed since before Earth's sun ignited, had witnessed the death of countless civilizations. What chance did one 17-year-old have against such ancient malevolence? But then the Heartstone pulsed against his chest, and through it came something unexpected. Not just the knowledge and power the dragons had shared with him, but their absolute confidence in his abilities. These ancient beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of empires believed in him completely. More than that, Marcus realized he could sense something the entities couldn't perceive. Through the Heartstone's connection, he felt the vast network of energy that connected all stable realities. The dragons weren't just individual beings. They were nodes in a cosmic defense system that had been protecting the multiverse for eons. And now he was part of that network. "You're right about one thing," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his mind. "Power alone isn't enough. But you've made one critical mistake in your calculations." The lead entity paused in its advance, its multiple sets of sensory organs focusing on him with predatory interest. "And what mistake is that, little bridge walker?" Marcus raised the heartstone, and its light began to pulse in sync with heartbeats he could feel across dimensional space. 12 ancient dragons, all focusing their will through the connection they shared with him. But there was more, much more. Through the network, he could sense other nodes of resistance, other realities where similar guardians stood against the entropy entities. "You assume we're isolated," Marcus said, and now his voice carried harmonics from a dozen different dimensional frequencies. "You think each reality stands alone, vulnerable to your harvest. But that's not how the universe works." The heartstone blazed with light that existed in spectrums beyond normal vision. Through his enhanced perception, Marcus could see the true structure of local space-time, the intricate web of connections that bound stable realities together in a framework of mutual support. Drawing on Cosmian's knowledge of void spaces, Marcus began to weave those connections into something new. Instead of simply sealing the breach, he was going to transform it into a conduit for the Cosmic Defense Network. "Impossible," the entity snarled, its form becoming more agitated as it sensed what Marcus was attempting. "The isolation protocols were established eons ago. Realities cannot share energy directly without causing cascade failures." The isolation protocols, Marcus realized with sudden understanding, weren't designed to protect realities from cascade failure. They were designed to keep realities isolated so you could harvest them one at a time. The entity's reaction confirmed his suspicion. The cosmic parasites hadn't just been randomly consuming dimensions. They had been systematically weakening the connections between realities to make their harvest easier. But the bridge walkers had been the universe's response to that strategy. Marcus reached out through the Heartstone's connection and found what he was looking for. Other bridge walkers, scattered across dozens of realities, all fighting similar battles against the same enemy. Most were losing, overwhelmed by entities that had been perfecting their harvest techniques for billions of years. But Marcus had something the others didn't. He had 12 ancient dragons sharing their power with him, and, more importantly, he had figured out what the Cosmic Defense Network was really supposed to do. Instead of fighting the entities directly, Marcus began to re-establish the connections they had severed. Using the breach as a focal point, he started weaving reality back together in patterns that hadn't existed since before the Great Separation. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Light poured through the dimensional tear, but not the sick illumination of the entity realm. This was the clean, stable energy of healthy space-time, and it burned the invading creatures like acid. "You cannot," the lead entity screamed as its form began to destabilize. "The harvest has been planned for millennia. This reality is already marked for consumption. Then you'll have to find another one," Marcus said grimly, pouring more power through the Heartstone. "Because this one is off the menu." The battle that followed tested every skill the dragons had taught him. The entities threw themselves at him with desperate fury, trying to disrupt his manipulation of the dimensional framework before he could complete the reconnection process. Marcus found himself fighting on multiple levels simultaneously, using Pyraxis's elemental mastery to create barriers of force while employing Mintara's consciousness techniques to protect his mind from psychic attacks. But the hardest part was maintaining focus on the delicate work of dimensional weaving. Each connection he re-established made the next one easier, but also drew more attention from entities throughout the local cluster of realities. They began arriving in increasing numbers, drawn by the threat to their carefully planned harvest. Just when Marcus thought he might be overwhelmed, help arrived from an unexpected source. Through the connections he was re-establishing, other bridge walkers began lending their power to his efforts. A woman from a reality where humanity had never left Earth, but had achieved perfect harmony with nature. A being that might once have been human, but had transcended physical form entirely. Others whose nature he couldn't even comprehend, but whose purpose aligned with his own. Together, they began to heal wounds in the cosmic framework that had festered for eons. The isolation protocols that the entities had established started to crumble, and stable realities began sharing energy and knowledge in ways that made them exponentially stronger than the sum of their parts. The change was too much for the entropy entities to withstand. Beings that had thrived in the spaces between isolated realities found themselves exposed to the full force of a reconnected multiverse. They began to retreat, their forms dissolving as they fled back to whatever dark corners of existence had spawned them. But Marcus wasn't finished. Drawing on knowledge that came from deeper sources than even the dragon memories, he began to modify the dimensional framework itself. If the entities could create isolation protocols, then he could create protection protocols that would make such harvests impossible in the future. The work required precision beyond anything he had attempted before. He was essentially performing surgery on the fundamental laws that governed how realities interacted with each other. One mistake could cause cascade failures that would destroy not just Earth, but dozens of connected dimensions. But the Heartstone guided his efforts, and the combined will of 12 ancient dragons provided the power he needed. Working faster than conscious thought, Marcus rewove the basic structure of local space-time into something new and infinitely more resilient. When the light finally faded, the dimensional breach was gone. In its place was something that looked like empty air to normal human perception, but registered to Marcus's enhanced senses as a node of crystallized stability. The spot where entities had tried to tear apart reality was now one of the strongest points in the dimensional framework. The surviving entities fled into deep void space, their harvest plans disrupted beyond any hope of recovery. And through the connections Marcus had reestablished, he could sense similar victories occurring across dozens of other realities as bridge walkers everywhere benefited from the knowledge and power he had unlocked. Marcus floated in the night air above Seattle, exhausted but victorious. The city below continued its normal routine, completely unaware that their reality had just been saved from consumption by cosmic parasites. Cars moved through streets, lights twinkled in windows, and ordinary humans lived their ordinary lives in blissful ignorance of how close they had come to extinction. "Well done, young bridge walker," Zephyros's voice whispered in his mind, full of pride and satisfaction. "You have exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The connections you forged tonight will protect this reality cluster for generations to come." But Marcus was already thinking beyond this single victory. Through the network he had helped restore, he could sense other realities still under threat, other harvest operations that needed to be disrupted. The war against the entropy entities was far from over. As he flew back toward the bookshop where this had all begun, Marcus realized that his transformation was still only beginning. He had learned to use dragon knowledge and bridgewalker abilities, but now he understood that these were just tools. The real power came from connections, from the willingness to stand together against forces that sought to divide and conquer. The lonely, invisible boy who had entered Professor Aldrich's shop was truly gone now. In his place was something new, something that connected Earth to a vast network of protected realities where intelligence and creativity could flourish without fear of cosmic predators. Marcus Chun had become exactly what the universe needed him to be. But his greatest challenges still lay ahead, because the entities he had defeated tonight were just the beginning of threats that existed in the deep spaces between realities. The real war was just getting started. 3 months had passed since the night Marcus Chun discovered he was a bridge walker, though to the rest of the world it had been mere hours. The temporal mechanics of dragon realms allowed for extensive training and preparation while barely disturbing the flow of normal time. Marcus had returned to Professor Aldrich's shop to find the old man exactly where he had left him, still examining the mysterious crate from Tibet. "Everything all right, my boy?" the professor had asked, noticing Marcus's slightly dazed expression. "You looked at that pendant and went quite pale." Marcus had simply smiled and claimed the artifact was more interesting than he had initially thought. Now he wore the heartstone beneath his shirt at all times, its gentle warmth a constant reminder of the vast responsibilities that rested on his shoulders. His life had settled into a strange new rhythm. To his classmates and teachers at Roosevelt High, Marcus remained the same quiet, studious boy he had always been. He attended classes, turned in homework, and maintained his near-invisible status among his peers. But during lunch breaks and after school, he would find secluded spots around the city where he could practice his abilities and monitor the dimensional stability of the Seattle area. The network he had helped restore was functioning perfectly. Through the Heartstone's connection, he could sense the health of dozens of linked realities, each one now protected by the mutual support system he had reestablished. Other bridge walkers checked in regularly through telepathic channels, sharing information about entity activity and coordinating responses to new threats. But it was the dragons who remained his closest allies and teachers. They had begun visiting him in the physical realm, though they maintained invisibility to anyone without enhanced perception. Zephyros in particular had taken to perching on the roof of Marcus's apartment building during the evenings, sharing stories of ancient civilizations and discussing the philosophical implications of Marcus's unique position. "You have accomplished something remarkable, young guardian," the ancient dragon had explained during one such conversation. "The Bridgewalker network had been dormant for millennia before your awakening. Most of us feared it would never function again." Marcus had learned that Bridgewalkers throughout history had been responsible for many of humanity's greatest leaps forward. They had guided the development of mathematics, inspired advances in physics, and subtly influenced the course of human civilization to ensure the species remained capable of producing new Bridgewalkers when the need arose. "So I'm not the first," Marcus had said, feeling simultaneously relieved and intimidated by the legacy. "Hardly," Verdania had replied with amusement. "But you may be the most important. The entity threat has been growing for eons, and previous Bridgewalkers could only respond defensively. You're the first to actively strengthen the Cosmic Defense Network." The responsibilities were staggering when Marcus allowed himself to think about them fully. He was connected to the safety and stability of countless billions of sentient beings across multiple realities. But somehow the weight felt manageable. The dragon knowledge had fundamentally changed how he processed information and stress, giving him a perspective that transcended normal human limitations. His biggest challenge had become maintaining his connection to normal humanity. The power flowing through him was intoxicating, and it would have been easy to lose himself in the vast cosmic perspective that came with his abilities. But Marcus had made a conscious decision to remain grounded in his human identity. He still worked at Professor Aldrich's shop, still struggled with calculus homework, still felt awkward around girls. These ordinary human experiences kept him anchored to the reality he was protecting, reminding him why the work mattered. The real test of his commitment came on a Tuesday evening in late November. Marcus was walking home from the library when the Heartstone suddenly flared with urgent warning. Through the network connection, he sensed a massive dimensional disturbance forming not in some distant reality, but right here on Earth. The location was shocking. Instead of an isolated construction site or abandoned warehouse, the breach was opening in the middle of Pike Place Market during evening rush hour. Hundreds of innocent people were about to be exposed to entities that could drive them insane with a single glimpse. Marcus ran toward the market, using his enhanced speed and partial dimensional phasing to cover the distance in minutes rather than the hour it would normally take. As he approached the crowded marketplace, he could see the effects of the dimensional disturbance beginning to manifest. The air above the fish vendors was shimmering like heat waves, and several people were stopping to point at the strange visual effect. Children were crying for reasons they couldn't explain, and dogs throughout the area were howling in distress. A few people with natural sensitivity to dimensional anomalies were backing away from the market, driven by instincts they didn't understand. But this breach was different from the one Marcus had sealed before. The energy patterns were more complex, suggesting multiple layers of reality manipulation. As he extended his enhanced perception, Marcus realized with growing horror what he was seeing. This wasn't a random entity incursion. It was a trap, specifically designed to force him into action in a location where his abilities would be witnessed by hundreds of people. The entities had learned from their previous defeat and adapted their strategy. Clever little bridge walker, a familiar voice spoke in his mind. It was the same entity he had fought at the construction site, somehow still existing despite the dimensional damage it had suffered. You protected your reality quite thoroughly, but you cannot maintain that protection if your entire species rejects you as a threat. Marcus understood the diabolical elegance of the plan. If he used his full abilities to seal the breach, he would expose the existence of supernatural forces to a large crowd of witnesses. In today's world of smartphones and social media, footage of him flying and manipulating energy would spread globally within hours. The panic and fear that would follow could destabilize human civilization and make his job of protecting Earth infinitely more difficult. But if he didn't act, the entities would pour through the breach and begin their harvest in the middle of one of Seattle's most popular tourist destinations. You face an impossible choice, the entity continued, its mental voice dripping with satisfaction. Reveal yourself and watch your species tear itself apart in fear and paranoia, or let us begin the harvest and accept responsibility for every death that follows. Marcus stood at the edge of Pike Place Market, watching the dimensional breach expand while dozens of people began taking pictures of the strange atmospheric disturbance. He had perhaps 30 seconds before the first entities started crossing over. Then, he smiled, remembering something Mentera had taught him about the nature of impossible choices. "You're right," he said, his mental voice carrying across dimensional space to reach the entity. This choice would be impossible for the old Marcus Chun. But I'm not that person anymore. Instead of flying or using obvious supernatural abilities, Marcus began to walk casually through the crowd toward the center of the disturbance. To any observer, he looked like just another curious teenager checking out the weird atmospheric phenomenon. But as he walked, Marcus was working on a level of reality manipulation so subtle that even the entities couldn't detect it immediately. Using techniques that combined Cronia's temporal mastery with Mentara's consciousness weaving, he began to adjust the perception filters of everyone in the marketplace. It wasn't mind control or memory erasure. Instead, Marcus was gently encouraging people's natural tendency to rationalize unusual experiences. The shimmering air became a weather phenomenon. The dimensional breach became an unusual cloud formation. The entities that were beginning to push through became a trick of light and shadow. By the time Marcus reached the center of the breach, every person in Pike Place Market was seeing exactly what their minds expected to see. A normal evening with perhaps slightly unusual lighting conditions. Their smartphones recorded ordinary scenes. Their memories processed normal events. Only then did Marcus reveal his true abilities, but by then, it was too late for the entities to adapt their strategy. Working with speed that defied human limitations, he sealed the breach and sent the invading creatures fleeing back to void space. To the hundreds of witnesses in Pike Place Market, nothing unusual had happened at all. They went about their business, bought their fish and flowers, and headed home with no memory of cosmic horror or supernatural teenagers. Impossible, the entity's voice whispered in his mind, weak with shock. The perception adjustments required for such a feat should have taken days to implement. You keep underestimating what bridge walkers can do, Marcus replied as he walked away from the market, just another anonymous teenager in the crowd. We don't just manipulate dimensions. We understand consciousness itself. The entity's presence faded from his mind, retreating to whatever dark corner of reality it called home. But Marcus knew it would be back, probably with an even more elaborate trap. The cosmic parasites were learning from each encounter, adapting their strategies to counter his growing abilities. As he walked through the Seattle streets toward home, Marcus felt the weight of his dual existence settling around him like a familiar coat. He was still Marcus Chun, high school student and part-time bookstore employee. But he was also the bridge walker, guardian of realities, and protector of the Cosmic Defense Network. The dragons were waiting for him on the roof of his apartment building, their massive forms invisible to everyone except him. Zephyros looked particularly pleased, his ancient eyes gleaming with something that might have been pride. Elegantly done, young guardian, the dragon rumbled approvingly. You are beginning to understand that the greatest victories are often the ones no one else notices. Marcus nodded, feeling the truth of those words. He had saved hundreds of lives tonight while preserving the secret that allowed him to continue his work. It was exactly the kind of subtle, complex solution that the situation had required. Looking up at the stars above Seattle, Marcus could sense the vast network of realities he helped protect, billions of worlds where intelligent life flourished under the shield he had helped rebuild. The responsibility was staggering, but so was the privilege. He was no longer just a boy who happened to stumble into an extraordinary destiny. Marcus Chun had become something new, something the universe had desperately needed. He was the bridge between human potential and cosmic responsibility, the guardian who stood watch while ordinary people lived extraordinary lives without ever knowing how close they came to annihilation. The entities would continue to probe for weaknesses, continue to adapt their strategies, and develop new forms of attack. But they would find Marcus ready for them, backed by the wisdom of ancient dragons and connected to a network of defenders that spanned the multiverse itself. As he climbed the stairs to his family's apartment, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Tomorrow he would attend chemistry class, help Professor Aldrich catalog new acquisitions, and worry about his upcoming history test. But tonight, he had once again saved the world, and nobody would ever know. It was exactly the way he preferred it.